This war is also a test of relationships. Some old partnerships, some new alliances, all of them will be tested rigorously, and each country will react based on one thing: their national interest. Germany is rearming itself. US allies like the UAE and Israel are circumspect. China is not ready for a Russian bear hug yet, and India is not willing to pick sides. These choices are not based on idealism, they're based on realism. Let's begin with India. New Delhi has abstained thrice at the United Nations Security Council. Is this an approval of Russia's actions? Far from it. India emphasized the importance of sovereignty and territorial integrity. It also called for dialogue. The decision to abstain is not a green light for war. It reflects India's own calculations. You need the US to counter Chinese belligerence. At the same time, you need leverage. You need options. Russia is a long-standing strategic partner, plus it brings indirect leverage over China. So simply put, Ukraine is not a problem India can solve. But China is a problem that India needs America and Russia to help solve. Which brings us to Russia's best hope: China. If Putin wants to blunt Western sanctions, he needs China. But Beijing is being cautious. Their statements have largely encouraged Russia, but their actions indicate reluctance. At the United Nations Security Council, China abstained. They could have sided with Russia, but they did not. Plus, Chinese state media is talking about neutrality. What explains this Chinese ambivalence? Again, their own self-interest. If China helps Russia, they could be caught in the crossfire. Chinese companies could face sanctions. The question is, does Xi Jinping want to risk that? China's trade with Russia is $147 billion. China's trade with the West is $1.6 trillion. If it comes to picking one, it is a no-brainer. Plus, there are limits to what China can do. Russia needs to sell oil immediately, but for that you need infrastructure, you need new pipelines, and all of this takes time. So China's help will depend on its own interests. Will Beijing lose access to the Western market? Will their companies face secondary sanctions? Politics alone will not bring Chinese assistance. And this reality applies to everyone. Even the two major American allies in West Asia are undecided: the UAE and Israel. The UAE has so far abstained at the UN Security Council, and Israel has refused to co-sponsor a resolution against Russia. Both countries are key US allies. They depend on military support from America. So why are they sitting on the fence? Again, self-interest. The UAE and Russia are part of the OPEC Plus cartel. They coordinate on regulating oil supply. So the Gulf states need a working relationship with Putin. Secondly, Russia's influence in West Asian conflicts. It's a very important factor. Putin controls the airspace in Syria. He holds considerable clout in Iran. Also, Russia and the UAE are backing the same side in Libya. An unfriendly Putin is the UAE's nightmare. Same for Israel. They need the Syrian airspace to target Iranian proxies. They need Putin's leverage over Tehran. So once again, national interest trumps principles. Israel has condemned the invasion, but it does not want to antagonize Putin further. And these responses can be described as subtle. And that is mostly down to geography. The war you see is happening in Europe. So West and South Asia are insulated from the fighting. But in Europe, big changes are afoot. Putin's war is changing the post-Cold War European order. Germany is leading that change. Since the Second World War, Berlin has been a reluctant power. On military, on diplomacy, Germany preferred following America's lead. Now that is set to change. Chancellor Olaf Scholz has announced a pivot in Germany's position. Listen to this.
The 2022 federal budget will provide this special fund with a one-off sum of 100 billion euros. We will use the funds for necessary investments and defense projects. From now on, we will annually invest more than 2% of our gross domestic product in our defense.
This is a big policy change for Germany. Their plan is to build a strong and modern fighting force. What does that mean for Europe? More hard power projection by Berlin, more German influence in Europe's security strategy. And it's not just Germany. Multiple European states are abandoning their 20th century policy. Neutral Switzerland has joined EU sanctions on Russia. Kosovo is asking for speedy NATO membership. They want to host US soldiers on their soil. Finland and Sweden are revisiting their non-alignment. Belarus is all set to become a Russian satellite state. Lawmakers in Belarus have approved this move. You could soon see Russian nukes on Belarusian soil. For Europe, this is a massive change. Ukraine's President Zelensky talked about it last week. He said a new Iron Curtain was falling over Europe. Well, we don't know about the curtain, but the old fault lines have certainly re-emerged. Does this mean it's Cold War 2.0? Not necessarily. Unlike the last century, this time Europe is not driving global politics. Asia is doing that. And right now, Asia does not seem interested in America versus Russia. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.